You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marble. I am really grateful on this beautiful snowy morning to finally be talking to Mary Roberds. We had an incredible conversation a few weeks ago, and so many parts of her story affected me deeply. Mary is an adopted person who has been in reunion since she was 19 years old. She is now 48 years old, still seeking out her biological father. She is committed to advocacy and adoptee rights and sharing her lived experience. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I think that I wish everyone could have been in on our first conversation because I remember being in my kitchen and my heart was just pumping. I'm a very visual person, and you just took me to so many places, and I was with you. And I know that our audience is going to feel the same. Can you take us to the beginning, because it was a difficult one, and just lead us through the path of your story as deep as you would like to go?
Sure. Well, thank you, Juan, for this opportunity to share my story. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, to a birth mother who had a number of mental health issues. And what that kind of resulted in was that she was unable to care well for a child once a child started moving. She desperately wanted to have children, and so she did. She had my sister, who she did relinquish, and she had me. When she had me, she took me home from the hospital, and she did pretty well until I was probably about 4 months old. I went into foster care at 4 months, and she was hospitalized for a mental breakdown. And then at that point, they sent me home, back home with her after 2 weeks. And I was getting around 6 months or so. I was starting to move and explore, and she just really couldn't handle a child that moved. So, um, I know she loved me. She was unable to care for me. She basically kept me in a crib until a neighbor reported it at when I was 13 months old. And DCFS came and they took me out, and I wasn't in good condition. I had the muscle tone of an infant. My teeth had come in black. I was very undernourished. Um, just really, it was a good thing that the neighbor had called and they got me out. So that is how that's the beginning. I found out some years later that for her, that separation was extremely traumatic. After they removed me, she ripped up my baby pictures and jumped out of her third-story window. She survived this. She shattered her arm, but it was devastating to her as well. I went into foster care with two wonderful adoptive parents. I'm sorry, foster parents, and this is the 70s, so they didn't know much about physical therapy or really how to rehabilitate a child that had had kind of the issues I had. I wasn't moving, I wasn't crawling. So my foster mother shared with me that my foster dad, who was really this big guy, got on the floor and was like demonstrating crawling, and I was just looking at him like, what are you doing? But they taught me to crawl and move. And so they weren't really sure what delays I would have. I did have some as far as physical coordination goes. Those somewhat are still with me, but they provided, a really safe and nurturing, environment for me. And I was with them until around the age of 2.5. My adoptive parents, were interested in adopting me. So visits were started between my foster family and my parents. Back then, I think they did several visits before you actually went and stayed with your adoptive family. And my adoptive family had a baby boy who was 6 months. So for me, that was a huge draw. Like, they have this baby. I love babies. I was super excited to be with them. Um, and so after probably a couple months, they took custody of me. And around the age of 3, I believe it was around the age of 3, I had a visit in Chicago at DCFS with my birth mother. And I did not know. I had been seeing her this whole time for regular visits. She had retained her parental rights. But at this visit, it was going to be the last visit that I would be seeing her. And I wasn't aware of it. She wasn't, I don't know, she wasn't in a mind space during the visit, and I remember it. And that's one thing I really want everybody to know. I want adults to know is that children have so much wherewithal. They understand, they see what's going on, they take it in, they're like sponges. And so my mother, my brother went into like, I remember getting in the car from my house. I remember that it was green. I remember stopping at a stoplight. I remember seeing the pigeons outside the building. I remember my mother, my baby brother were in a room with blue plastic chairs, and we went down another hall. And at the end of the hall, she was sitting next to a radiator in office. During the visit, she asked if she could hold me. So she picked me up, put me on her lap. She was stroking my hair. She gave me a toy. So it must have been around Christmas time. And I clearly remember what it was. And I was just enthralled with this toy. And nearing the end of the visit, I heard the social worker reassure her that I would have a good life. And I wasn't really sure what that was meaning because I was just kind of playing with my toy. But as we left to go, we started walking up the hallway, and I looked back and I saw my birth mother sobbing. Um, and so, in my little 3-year-old body, I knew something was wrong. I kind of wanted to go back. That they took me up the hall and into the next room with my mother and brother, and we went home. And that was the last time I saw her. Um, I didn't really fully understand that until I was in preschool. So probably 4.5 ish. And we were in the car and we were going to parent teacher conferences with my adoptive parents. And I overheard my mom and my dad talking in the front seat. And they said that, should we tell Mary's teacher that she has been adopted or is being adopted? And I got it at that moment. And I realized I'm never going to see her again. And I remember it was raining, and I remember watching the rain go down the window of the car and thinking, I cannot forget her face. I have to remember her face. And it was like that moment, this like video camera went on, and I have such an amazing, vivid, and clear memory of so many parts of my childhood because I was just locking it in. Um, and I replayed the picture of her face my whole childhood. I remembered that it seemed like she had like a prominent jaw. It almost looked square to me. I remember she was kind of a bigger woman. I remembered she had short blonde hair that came to her chin. Um, I sort of, I think I remember her having blue eyes, but now, as the memory started fading over the years, that detail became, her face started to fade. And that was heartbreaking to me as I became 8 and 9 and 10. But I still kind of knew what she looked like. And I would revisit this memory so often that it just didn't change. Over the years, I wondered about her. When my mom was in a kind of a good mood, I would try to sneak in the questions like, hey, just trying to get any answers. My parents were very forthright in the fact that I had been adopted. Well, for one, I remembered it. I remember being at court. I remember them asking me if I wanted to be, my middle name is Jane. So they asked me in court if I wanted to be Mary Jane. Well, of course, I said yes, because I didn't know what they were talking about. How could you not want to be who you are? But I didn't know this was my big chance to change my name. It was. But I said I wanted to be Mary Jane, and here I am today. But they were always very forthright. And my mom told me around the age of 8 that I had a sister that had been placed before me. And as soon as I heard that, I wanted to find this sister, and I wanted to find my birth mother so badly. And I thought she was 2 years older than me. So every year when I turned the next age, I would add 2 and be like, okay, I'm 10, she's 12. Um, that was really a really strong pull, was that I had this sister out there. And my adopted family, I had a brother. So a sister was something I had always wanted. Um, so they had been very honest about things, but I still knew that it was conversation. I could tell it felt like it made my mom uncomfortable. So I didn't want to broach it very often. When I was around, I would say around 13, my mom took a nap, and right before her nap, she asked me if I could get some money for my brother from the box under her bed. It was like a it was like a security box, which she had open at the time. And I went to get the money. And to this day, I don't know if she had intended for me to find the papers I found in there or not. But at 13, I had already gotten a bunch of books from the local library on adoption. And one thing I had read was if you find anything, you need to have it in your possession because documents disappear. And so when I opened this box under the bed, I saw an envelope that said papers for Mary. And I opened it, and what was in it was the papers that terminated my birth father's rights. And
Mm.
on those papers was my birth mother's full name and the name of my alleged father. And I knew I
Wow.
had struck gold. So
Mhm.
I ran to the library. I took the papers, I shoved them under my shirt. I ran to the library, which was like 5 blocks away. I Xerox copied these papers. I ran back. I folded them up just the way they had been. I put them back in the box, put the papers under my mattress in my room, and never said anything about it again for many years.
Oh my goodness, Mary. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I just can't imagine being that small and having the distinct memories. We talk a lot about implicit memory with adoption, that
Mhm.
trauma that happens before you remember. But
Yes.
it just breaks my heart to think about what you've been through. But I also think you have so much courage. The fact that you found those papers and you had the wherewithal to
Mhm.
run 5 blocks and Xerox them, you already knew, like your soul knew you needed
Mhm.
to put the parts and pieces of your life together.
Yes.
So what happened next? Like how did you get through your teen years, and because you found your birth,
I
you went
did.
back and found your first mom at
Mhm.
19. So this is
Yes.
happening for you at very young and at a
Very young.
very formative age as well.
Mhm. Yes, so when I was a teenager and through those years, I and my friends that grew up with me knew I was always talking about wanting to find, my birth mother, my sister, the rest of my family, um, and, there's lots of things that were happening through those years, like the movie Annie came out. Then there was The American Tale where the mouse is singing somewhere out there. And I would just listen to that and sob. I mean, so it just didn't seem to ever go away. Like every Disney movie, the main character loses their mother. So from a very young time, I felt like there were these reminders just all around me. And it hit me so deep. So when I was maybe around I don't know, maybe around 15, 16, my friend and I went to a group in Chicago, a Chicago suburb called Truth Seekers and Adoption. And we got, this is the first time I'm connecting with other adoptees who are also really passionate about search and reunion. And I wasn't at the legal age where I could search, but we were, sitting there just really gathering as much information as we could. I was blessed through that group to find a gentleman who was able to help me when I was 19. He was able to locate my birth mother, and within, let's see, about a week or two after, he found my sister as well.
Oh wow, Mary.
It was amazing, and it was actually, I believe, it must have been, it was like I had just left for college. And well, when I found my birth mother was my first year, then into my second year, I came home from being at home and there was an answering message from my sister saying I had sent her a letter and she called back saying, I am the person you're looking for. And at that point, I connected with her and it's just amazing. And my birth mother, as soon as this gentleman called her, she ran to a payphone and called me 15 minutes later. So I got a call from
Oh,
him saying, I found her and I'm going to go knock on her door. And 15 minutes later, the phone rang and it was her, which
oh, Mary.
it's amazing. It's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Can you tell me or tell us more about the moment when you saw her face again? That face that
Yes.
you had held so tightly in memory. My
Yes. Yes. So we talked in the initial conversation. I took a lot of notes because I'm like that. My adoptive dad took me down to Chicago because she was in the city to see her. And I have to say, my adoptive parents at this point, when I had turned, 17, 18, I broke down and just told them how important this was to me. And they had no idea that over the years I had all these feelings and thoughts. And so at that point, my mom had taken me to the bank and we did find the papers that I had. So I had their permission to go ahead. I would have done it honestly either way. But my parents were very loving, and so my dad drove me down. My adoptive mom baked a loaf of bread for my birth mother to give to her, and so it was good because at this point I felt their support. And so my dad and we go to the building and we're outside the door and I knock on the door. And so she opens the door and I'm shocked because she looks so short. So she's like 5, she was like 5'2". And as a child, my memory of her was like she was big because she towered over me. And I remember her being a bigger, like almost overweight person. So she was stick thin and her hair was long and dark. And so this was not the face that or the body or anything that I thought I had remembered. It was a little strange in the moment, but however, there was a recognition.
Mm.
Like when I hugged her, I felt like this electricity. I cannot explain it. It's only been present when my mother, my sister, it's been like that. It's almost like a recognition of each other. It was very powerful. But as I sat down and talked to her, and I told her, I said, I remember you. I remember the last time I saw you and you were crying. And I needed to make sure that you're okay and that you're okay now. And I said, when I was little, but I'm confused because you had short blonde hair and it was cut to here. And her eyes got really big and she looked at me. She's like, oh my God, you do remember me. And she said, right after you were born, I had my hair chopped to here and colored blonde, which dark was her natural color, but I had remembered her as I had last seen her. So she was able to validate that memory for me, which
That had to be amazing.
it was amazing. It was. And it also like it kind of, when so many years have gone by, it kind of just like verifies like this is the person, you
Mhm.
know. The other thing that was neat for her was that the 2 weeks I had been in foster care at 4 months old, my foster parents had taken me for a picture. I didn't have any pictures of really of being a baby, but I had this one picture that my foster parents had given me actually years later. I had met them when I was 12 and they gave me some of these pictures. I had brought a copy for her and she started crying because this was the picture she had that she had ripped up. And so for her, it was also a good this is the baby. She's now a woman, but this is the baby. And so that moment was just really, really special for both of us.
Gosh, I'm emotional about all of this. Um, I I just think it's so brave to be able to go and seek your truth and look into the eyes of your mother
Your mother.
and
Mhm.
be able to have that electricity and that healing and the continuation of a story that was, cut off way too
Mhm.
soon and for very
Mhm.
tragic reasons. So, Mary, can you talk to us about? I really think it's important that we speak out about our stories. A lot of people are under the impression that adoption is pretty clean cut and
Right.
it's good news for everyone. And
Right.
the reality is there is so much trauma. And I
Yes.
think something that's very important to you is that you explain the impact of adoption. How do you feel about adoptee rights and what do you think some of the errors and assumptions are? I think it's important we spend some time on that element because I know how important it is to you.
Sure. Right. Yeah. For me, every step of the journey I felt very alone in, because especially at that time period, there wasn't a whole lot of support out there. And as years have gone by, I've been happy to see more support building for adoptees and those trying to find their truth. But there is still so much to be done. And, I think when you for me growing up adopted, it was, and I'm speaking for myself. I just need to put that out there because I cannot, my experience is not every adoptee's experience. Everybody has their own experience and their own feelings. But for me, I was constantly searching. Like I was searching the faces on buses. I was looking everywhere. You're and being so cognizant that there is this huge piece of me that's gone. And one thing that I've really strongly felt over the years is that, how can it be and why is it that one signature on a piece of paper has the power to cut me off from not only my parent, but my siblings, my extended family, my health history, and my ancestors? One person should not have the power to sign a piece of paper and have that imposed on me for the rest of my life. And this is what's happening and what happens in adoption. And it does largely, I'm like I said, I've been pleased to see more movement, but many times it goes unacknowledged. A lot of times we do see a lot of support for adoptees who have medical issues. Oh, they need to find out, the medical, but it's more than that. It's more than that. You know, I think a lot of times that I have found myself explaining because I've done some advocacy work and I've talked to adoptive families and really tried to express to them, it's not about replacing the adoptive family. It's not about replacing that unit. That unit is there, but when you're adopted, you have more than one family. You have other family, and so it needs to be more of blending the families and not just one family's here and one family's there. I have historical history with both of my families. Um, so one I'm connected to genetically, and that is a profound historical history. And one I'm connected to not genetically, but I've had my birthdays and I've had my joys and shared my sorrows with them, and that also is a profound thing. So for me, it's kind of like you need to honor both. You need to honor the joy in adoption, but you need to hold space for the pain. And I think too often it's skewed. We hear the stories, we have celebrations when people adopt, and why that's all wonderful. The child is left alone carrying the brunt of all these intense feelings by themselves. And I'm glad to see more movement with therapists and counselors and adoptive parents that are stepping up to the plate and going, I know my child is dealing with more, but I still think there's so much work that needs to be done going forward.
I couldn't agree with you more. It wasn't until a few years ago, and I've heard other adopted people say this, that they realized there was even a community for adoption.
Yes.
And the fact that we're out there telling our stories in books and in podcasts, and hopefully we'll just get louder and louder until we can't be ignored anymore.
Right.
And I think that is the points that you made are so important, Mary. And can you take us to now? Like,
Mhm.
this is a lifelong journey, a lifelong struggle, and you've clearly survived. So have
Mhm.
I. We're here. All of you out there are still here. We're
Yes.
doing the thing. But
Yes.
what is it? What can you give to our audience that has helped you like get through the struggle of this? How have you been able to pick yourself back up, and what encouragement can you give to the people that are listening all over the globe?
Sure. I would say really find out who you are first, because even when you search and you find those other pieces, it still doesn't put them together into one whole picture. So if you can kind of really know who you are and spend time getting to, do what you want to do, search your passions, have something that you can fall back on when the times get really, really hard. Um, it's a process, like I said, that can be very lonely, and I also feel it's important to have a good therapist, somebody who is adoption competent, who can, validate and recognize and really just sit with you at some of these hard feelings. Adoption is a process that keeps changing, and as your life changes at every developmental step, there is some, for me at least, there has been some reminder of or a new way of looking at my adoption experience. As when I became a mom, I had a little girl, and looking at this infant and thinking, how could I ever be separated from her? it just every single step that you're at creates almost a new, I wouldn't say wound, but a new challenge maybe. For some people, it's really hard to sit with that. And I do think connecting to a therapist, connecting to support groups, connecting to other adoptees. There are adoptee groups out there now. There's Adoptees Connect. There's, adoptees that are meeting in person. That in-person experience is invaluable. Um, I never felt completely loved. I mean, not loved, but completely accepted in myself until I sat in a room with other adoptees.
Mm.
It's just this recognition of being, we all have the same experience of never quite fitting, of having pieces missing, but in each other we can find strength, and we can, and it's amazing how powerful that connection is. So I would say, read, listen to podcasts, educate yourself, know that you're not alone. There's so many people out there. There's so many people like coming out of the fog, and really understanding that, when you're adopted, you sort of feel like you've been, for me, I'm going to say that again, just from my experience, but it's kind of like no one around you is related to you. You don't have anything to mirror. Your identity has to be solely built by yourself. So looking at, and talking with other adoptees is a great way to establish part of your identity as being an adoptee, and to take strength from it, because we're strong. We are a strong group of people. We are fighting for our rights. We're fighting for basic human rights. And that right is to know who brought us to this earth, who we're connected to, who our ancestors were before us, and to be able to give those roots and that information to our children. My daughter has one side of the family right now that, I still have not located my birth father. So at 48, I'm still searching. I can't give her that information. And so there's still are pieces missing. And the only way that you are going to do this, I believe, and be successful and come out feeling strong and empowered, is to connect with other adoptees, connect with people who understand, and really go forward in that direction.
I want to give you a standing ovation right now. That was so brilliant and so important, because one of the points that you made, Mary, is the loneliness.
Mhm.
It is entirely possible to be so lonely, even if people are around. But to have the connection with others and to take that step, and it's hard if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, and you just want to crawl into a hole. You
Yes.
don't want to see anyone, don't want to talk to anyone. But if you can make that effort, it will feed that part of us that is so hungry and empty, just
Yes.
to have like real, legitimate connection with others that truly understand. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time today to share your story so intimately, to go back to those very painful moments with the hope that it's going to help so many people. And indeed, it will, Mary. I just really appreciate you. And I hope we can circle back someday and find out where you're at in your process.
That would be good. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for this opportunity. I appreciate being able to speak, and that 3-year-old little girl who just wanted people to know, I know what's going on, is happy now, because it's like I always wanted to grow up and tell people kids know so much more than we give them credit for. And I appreciate you allowing me to do that.
Oh gosh, Mary, it is my ultimate pleasure.
Thank you.